The morning sun painted the streets of Hartford in soft golden light. Judge Reynolds hummed along to his favorite jazz station as he drove his Mercedes through the quiet neighborhood. He had just finished his morning jog and was looking forward to meeting his daughter for their weekly Sunday brunch tradition. At 52, Reynolds had earned his position through years of hard work and dedication. He remembered the late nights studying law books, the challenging cases, and the day he was appointed as a federal judge. But today wasn't about work. Today was about family time. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. "Dad, got us a table by the window. Can't wait to hear about your new case." He smiled, thinking about how proud he was of her following in his footsteps to law school. Meanwhile, Officers Caldwell and Reed were patrolling the same neighborhood. They had been partners for 3 years, but their methods often raised eyebrows at the station. Caldwell, the senior officer, had a habit of making quick judgments based on appearances. Reed, younger and eager to impress, usually followed his lead without question. As Reynolds approached a red light, he adjusted his sunglasses and changed the radio station. The officer's patrol car pulled up behind him. "Check out that Mercedes," Caldwell muttered to his partner. "What's he doing in this neighborhood?" Reed shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe he lives here." Caldwell shook his head. "Let's check him out. Something doesn't feel right." When the light turned green, Reynolds continued driving at the speed limit, completely unaware he had attracted attention. The patrol car followed closely. After 2 blocks, the blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror. Reynolds sighed and carefully pulled over, making sure to stop in a well-lit area near some houses. He had been through traffic stops before and knew the routine. He turned off the engine, placed his hands visibly on the steering wheel, and waited. Officer Caldwell approached the driver's side while Reed positioned himself by the passenger door. Reynolds lowered his window and greeted them politely. "Good morning, officers. Is there a problem?" "License and registration," Caldwell demanded without returning the greeting. "Of course," Reynolds replied calmly. "I'm going to reach for my wallet now, which is in my back pocket. Is that okay?" Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "Just do it slowly." Reynolds retrieved his documents and handed them over. "May I ask why I was stopped?" "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," Caldwell said, though no such reports existed. "What are you doing here?" "I'm heading to meet my daughter for brunch," Reynolds explained. "I live about 10 minutes from here." Reed peered into the car, noting the leather seats and high-end interior. "Nice car," he commented, his tone suggesting disbelief. "Thank you," Reynolds responded. "I've had it for 2 years now." Caldwell studied the license, then looked back at Reynolds. "Stay in the vehicle. We need to run these." As they walked back to their patrol car, Reynolds could hear snippets of their conversation through his open window. Words like "probably stolen" and "doesn't belong here" drifted to his ears. He took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. In the patrol car, Caldwell ran the plates and license through the system. Everything came back clean, but he wasn't satisfied. "I don't buy it," he told Reed. "Let's dig deeper." They returned to Reynolds' car, their postures more aggressive than before. "Step out of the vehicle," Caldwell ordered. Reynolds hesitated. "Officer, I've provided my documents and I've been cooperative. Is stepping out really necessary?" "I said get out of the car." Caldwell's voice rose sharply. Several neighbors had started watching from their porches and windows. A woman walking her dog stopped across the street, concerned about the escalating situation. Reynolds unbuckled his seatbelt slowly. "I'm complying with your request," he said clearly, aware that witnesses were present. "But I want to state for the record that I don't understand why this is necessary." As he opened the door and stepped out, he maintained his dignified composure, even as his heart raced. He knew this situation could go very wrong very quickly. Little did the officers know, they were about to learn a lesson that would change their lives forever. Judge Reynolds stood beside his car, the morning breeze gently ruffling his polo shirt. He kept his hands visible, knowing from years in the courtroom how quickly situations could spiral out of control. The 2 officers circled him like hawks, their eyes scanning for any reason to escalate the encounter. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," Officer Caldwell commanded, his voice harsh and demanding. Reynolds complied slowly, his mind racing. This was no ordinary traffic stop. He'd seen this pattern before in countless cases that crossed his bench. "Officers, I'd like to understand what this is about. Have I committed a traffic violation?" "We'll ask the questions here," Caldwell snapped. "You got any weapons on you?" "No, I don't carry weapons," Reynolds replied calmly. "I'm a federal judge heading to meet my daughter." The words seemed to bounce off the officers like raindrops on concrete. Reed laughed dismissively. "Right, and I'm the president. Save the stories for someone who'll believe them." Reynolds felt the familiar sting of disbelief, the same one he'd experienced throughout his career whenever someone couldn't reconcile his appearance with his achievements. He took a deep breath, maintaining his composure. "My judicial identification is in my wallet. May I show it to you?" "Don't move," Caldwell barked, stepping closer. "You reach for anything, and we'll consider it a threat." More neighbors had gathered now, smartphones raised, recording the scene. An elderly man across the street shook his head sadly, recognizing the injustice unfolding before his eyes. Reynolds tried a different approach. "Officers, I understand you're doing your job, but I assure you I'm not a threat. I've been cooperative. Can you please tell me what crime you suspect me of committing?" Caldwell ignored the question. "This car, how'd you afford it? You dealing? Got a stash somewhere?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. Reynolds felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice steady. "I purchased this car legally with money I earned from my career in law." "Career in law?" Reed scoffed. "You mean like those lawyers who get drug dealers off on technicalities?" Reynolds realized reasoning with them was futile. Their minds were made up the moment they saw his skin color behind the wheel of an expensive car. He decided to try one more time. "I need to call my office. There are people expecting me." As he moved his hand toward his pocket, everything happened at lightning speed. Caldwell shouted, "He's reaching," and lunged forward, grabbing Reynolds' arm and twisting it behind his back. "I'm just getting my phone." Reynolds protested, but Reed had already joined in, pushing him hard against the car hood. The metal was cold against Reynolds' cheek as the officers pinned him down. He could hear gasps from the onlookers and the continuous clicking of phone cameras. His daughter's text message flashed in his mind. She was waiting for him, probably wondering why he was late. "Stop resisting," Caldwell yelled, though Reynolds wasn't resisting at all. "I'm not resisting," Reynolds said clearly, loud enough for the witnesses to hear. "I'm complying with everything you've asked." Reed pulled out his handcuffs, the metal gleaming in the morning sun. "We've got a real tough guy here, thinks he's above the law." As the cold steel clicked around his wrists, Reynolds felt a mix of humiliation and anger. Not for himself, he'd long ago learned to channel such emotions productively, but for every person who'd endured this treatment without the protection of his position. "You're making a mistake," Reynolds said quietly. "But more importantly, you're perpetuating a system that needs to change." Caldwell leaned close, his breath hot on Reynolds' ear. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can drive through our neighborhood without consequences." The irony wasn't lost on Reynolds. Our neighborhood, as if skin color determined who belonged where. He'd spent his career fighting against such prejudices, and now he was experiencing them firsthand. Reed patted down Reynolds roughly, pulling out his wallet, phone, and keys. Well, what do we have here?" As Reed opened the wallet, looking for what he assumed would be evidence of criminal activity, neither officer noticed the judicial identification card tucked behind the driver's license. They were too focused on finding what they expected to find, proof that their prejudices were justified. The scene was set for a revelation that would shake both officers to their core, but for now, Judge Reynolds remained pinned against his own car, handcuffed and humiliated, waiting for truth to finally break through their wall of assumptions. With his hands cuffed behind his back, Judge Reynolds stood tall despite the officers' attempts to intimidate him. The morning sun grew warmer, and more neighbors gathered on their lawns and porches. Some recorded videos while others whispered among themselves, clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. "Please at least tell me what I'm being charged with," Reynolds requested again, his voice steady and clear. Officer Caldwell ignored him and turned to Reed. "Search the car. I bet we'll find something interesting." "You need probable cause or a warrant to search my vehicle," Reynolds stated firmly. "This is a violation of the Fourth Amendment." Reed smirked. "Listen to this guy, talking like he's some kind of lawyer. You watch too many crime shows, buddy. As Reed began rummaging through the car, Reynolds noticed an elderly woman across the street shaking her head in disapproval. A young couple walking their baby in a stroller had stopped to watch, their faces etched with concern. The growing crowd made Caldwell visibly uncomfortable, but he doubled down on his actions instead of reconsidering. Found something, Reed called out, holding up a legal briefcase from the back seat. Looks expensive, probably stolen. Reynolds sighed. That briefcase contains confidential court documents. I strongly advise you not to open it. Oh, now it's confidential? Caldwell mocked. What are you hiding? Drug money? Fake IDs? Without waiting for an answer, Reed unzipped the briefcase. Legal papers spilled out, each stamped with official federal court seals. Reed's forehead creased in confusion as he scanned the documents. Meanwhile, Caldwell continued his verbal assault. You know, people like you think you can just come into nice neighborhoods, driving fancy cars, acting all high and mighty, but we see right through it. Reynolds remained silent this time, recognizing that words would only fuel the officer's prejudice. He focused instead on memorizing badge numbers and noting the exact time on a nearby house's outdoor clock. A teenager across the street called out, "This isn't right. He hasn't done anything wrong." "Mind your own business," Caldwell shouted back, his face reddening. The situation was spiraling. Reynolds could feel the tension in the air, thick like humidity before a storm. He knew that one wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, could turn this bad situation into a tragedy. Reed, still sorting through the papers, suddenly froze. His eyes widened as he read a document header, United States District Court, Honorable Judge Reynolds presiding. "Hey, Caldwell," Reed's voice wavered slightly. "You might want to look at this." But Caldwell was too focused on asserting his authority. "Whatever it is, bag it as evidence. We'll sort it out at the station." Reynolds watched as more patrol cars arrived, their sirens off but lights flashing. The backup officers approached, and he recognized Sergeant Williams, a veteran officer who had testified in his courtroom multiple times. Williams took one look at the scene, Reynolds in handcuffs, papers scattered, the growing crowd. And his professional demeanor cracked. "What's going on here?" "Routine stop," Caldwell answered confidently. "Suspicious individual, possible stolen vehicle, refusing to cooperate." Williams stepped closer, his eyes meeting Reynolds. Recognition dawned instantly. The sergeant's face went pale, and he quickly moved to where Reed was still holding court documents. "Officers," Williams' voice was tight with controlled panic. "Do you know who this is?" Caldwell shrugged. "Some guy who thinks he's above the law." "This is Federal Judge Reynolds," Williams announced, each word heavy with implication. "He presides over the district court. I've testified before him at least a dozen times." The silence that followed was deafening. Reed dropped the papers he was holding, his hands suddenly shaking. Caldwell's confident posture deflated like a punctured balloon. That's impossible," Caldwell stammered. He was acting suspicious, and the car. Reynolds finally spoke, his judicial voice carrying across the street. "The car is registered in my name. I was driving the speed limit. I complied with every request. The only suspicious activity here was my skin color in what you called your neighborhood." The crowd murmured in agreement. Phones continued recording as the reality of the situation crashed down on the two officers. They had just handcuffed and searched a federal judge without cause, a man who held the power to change not just their careers, but the entire trajectory of their lives. Williams moved quickly to Reynolds. "Your Honor, I am so sorry. Let me get those cuffs off immediately." The morning air seemed to freeze as Sergeant Williams carefully removed the handcuffs from Judge Reynolds' wrists. The clicking sound echoed in the sudden silence that had fallen over the street. Officers Caldwell and Reed stood motionless, their faces drained of color as the reality of their actions began to sink in. "Your Honor, I cannot express how sorry I am," Williams repeated, his voice trembling slightly. He turned to his officers with barely contained anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Caldwell opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since the stop began, he looked uncertain. Reed was fumbling with the judge's belongings, trying to gather the scattered court documents with shaking hands. "Let me help you understand," Reynolds said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. He pulled out his judicial identification card and held it up. "This is real. I am a federal judge. And everything that just happened here has been recorded by at least a dozen citizens." The crowd had grown larger, with more phones pointed at the scene. Some people were already posting videos online, and the digital world was beginning to buzz with the incident. But you didn't say." Caldwell started weakly. "I told you multiple times," Reynolds interrupted. "You chose not to listen. You saw what you wanted to see, a black man in an expensive car, and made assumptions based on that alone." Williams was on his radio, calling for his supervisor. "Captain, we have a situation. You need to come to Maple Street immediately. It's about Judge Reynolds." While they waited, Reynolds straightened his clothes and accepted his belongings back from Reed, who couldn't meet his eyes. The young officer's hands were still trembling as he handed over the wallet and phone. I didn't know," Reed mumbled. "That's exactly the problem," Reynolds replied. "You didn't know, and you didn't care to find out. You assumed the worst based on appearance alone." A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up, and Police Captain Morrison stepped out. She took one look at the scene: Reynolds, the scattered papers, the filming crowd, and her two officers looking like they'd seen a ghost, and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Judge Reynolds," she said, approaching with measured steps. "I'm Captain Morrison. I'm deeply sorry for what's happened here." Reynolds nodded. "Captain, I appreciate your prompt response. However, this goes beyond a simple apology. Your officers conducted an illegal stop, search, and detention based solely on racial profiling." Morrison's jaw tightened. "I understand, Your Honor. This will be fully investigated." "It needs to be more than just an investigation," Reynolds continued. "This happens every day to people who don't have my position or resources. Today, it happened to someone who can make sure it's addressed properly." Caldwell finally found his voice. "Your Honor, we were just doing our job. We've had car thefts in the area." "Stop," Reynolds held up his hand. "There were no recent car theft reports in this neighborhood. I know because I reviewed the crime statistics last week for a case. You created a fictional scenario to justify your bias." The captain turned to her officers. "Both of you return to the station immediately. You're suspended pending investigation. Hand over your badges and weapons." As Caldwell and Reed reluctantly complied, the weight of their actions truly hit them. They had just destroyed their careers in less than 30 minutes. Meanwhile, the videos were spreading rapidly online. News vans were already on their way, and Reynolds' phone was buzzing with calls from his office and local media. A young woman from the crowd approached carefully. "Judge Reynolds? I'm a law student. I've attended your lectures. What you said about this happening to others, that's why I recorded everything. People need to see this." Reynolds smiled at her. "Thank you. Documentation is crucial for change. What's your name?" "Angela Chen," she replied. "I want to help make sure this leads to something meaningful." Captain Morrison was coordinating with arriving supervisors while Reynolds spoke with witnesses, ensuring their contact information was collected. He knew this moment could be a turning point, not just for these officers, but for the entire department's approach to community policing. "Your Honor," Morrison said, returning to him. "The chief is on his way. He wants to personally apologize and discuss how we can prevent this from happening again." Reynolds looked at the captain, then at the crowd still gathered, their phones still recording. "Good, because this conversation is long overdue. And this time, the whole country will be listening." As more police vehicles and news vans arrived, Reynolds realized his quiet Sunday brunch had transformed into something much bigger. A moment that could spark real change in how law enforcement treats all citizens, regardless of their appearance. The quiet Sunday morning had transformed into a media circus. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like mechanical sunflowers. Reporters adjusted their microphones while cameras captured every angle of the scene where Judge Reynolds stood, still composed despite the ordeal he'd endured. Police Chief Thompson arrived in an unmarked car, his face grave as he surveyed the situation. He was a tall man with silver hair and had served the department for 30 years. Nothing in those 3 decades had prepared him for this moment. "Judge Reynolds," the chief began, extending his hand. "I'm Chief Thompson. Words cannot express how deeply sorry I am for what my officers put you through." Reynolds shook his hand firmly. "Chief, while I appreciate your apology, we both know this isn't just about me. This is about a systemic problem that affects countless people who don't have my position to protect them." The crowd, which had grown to nearly 50 people, murmured in agreement. Many were still recording, their phones capturing this historic moment. A reporter stepped forward. "Judge Reynolds, can you tell us what happened here today?" Reynolds turned to face the cameras, his voice steady and clear. "What happened today is what happens far too often in our communities. I was stopped without cause, treated with suspicion and hostility, and detained simply because of how I look. The only difference is that today, it happened to someone who can ensure it doesn't get swept under the rug." The chief shifted uncomfortably but remained silent, knowing the judge spoke the truth. "Your Honor," another reporter called out, "what do you plan to do about this incident?" Reynolds paused thoughtfully before responding. "First, I want to thank all the citizens who witnessed and recorded this event. Your documentation is crucial. As for my plans, I will be filing a formal complaint and pushing for a comprehensive review of the department's practices." Angela Chen, the law student, raised her hand. "Judge Reynolds, how can ordinary citizens help create change?" "Excellent question," Reynolds replied. "Document incidents when you see them. Support community oversight boards. Vote for leaders who prioritize police reform. And most importantly, speak up against injustice whenever you encounter it." The chief stepped forward. "Judge Reynolds is right. This incident will trigger a full investigation. Officers Caldwell and Reed have been suspended, and we will review all their previous stops and arrests." An elderly man from the crowd spoke up. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. This isn't the first time I've seen those officers harass people, but it's the first time someone important got caught in their net." His words hung heavy in the air, highlighting the painful truth that many incidents go unreported and unaddressed. Reynolds' phone buzzed again, his daughter calling for the 5th time. He answered, "I'm okay, sweetheart. Yes, I'll explain everything when I see you. No, don't come here. I'll meet you at the restaurant soon." After hanging up, he addressed the crowd once more. "I was on my way to have brunch with my daughter when this happened. A simple Sunday tradition interrupted by prejudice. But maybe this interruption was necessary. Maybe this is exactly where I needed to be today." The chief's phone rang. After a brief conversation, he announced, "The mayor wants to meet with you, Judge Reynolds. She's calling for an emergency city council meeting to address police reform." "Good," Reynolds nodded. "But this can't be just another meeting that leads nowhere. We need concrete actions, mandatory bias training, community oversight, and real consequences for officers who abuse their power." A young mother holding her child approached. "Judge Reynolds, thank you for staying calm through all this. You showed our children how to handle injustice with dignity." "That's kind of you to say," Reynolds smiled. "But no one should have to remain calm while their rights are violated. The burden of composure shouldn't fall on the victims of injustice." As the morning progressed, the street became an impromptu forum for discussing race relations and police reform. Citizens shared their own stories of unfair treatment, while others expressed hope that this incident would finally bring change. Reynolds spent another hour speaking with community members, reporters, and officials. He made sure every witness provided their contact information for the upcoming investigation. He knew that real change would require sustained effort, not just a moment of outrage. Finally, as noon approached, Reynolds prepared to leave. The chief offered him a ride, but he declined. "I'll drive myself, thank you. That's what started all this, and that's how I'll finish it." Before getting into his car, Reynolds turned to the crowd one last time. "Remember this day. Not because of what happened to me, but because of what we're going to make happen next. Change starts with moments like these, but it only continues if we all stay committed to justice." As he drove away, heading finally to meet his daughter, the crowd began to disperse. But the conversations continued, the videos kept spreading, and the momentum for change was building. What began as racial profiling had become a catalyst for transformation. The video clips of Judge Reynolds' arrest spread across social media like wildfire. By evening, the hashtag Judge Reynolds was trending nationwide. News channels ran the story continuously, featuring legal experts and civil rights leaders discussing the implications of the incident. Monday morning arrived with the police department in crisis mode. Internal Affairs had worked through the night, pulling records of every traffic stop made by officers Caldwell and Reed over the past 5 years. The findings were troubling. A clear pattern of stops targeting minority drivers, often with flimsy justifications. In his chambers, Judge Reynolds met with his legal team. "We're not just filing a complaint," he told them. "We're building a case that will set a precedent. This isn't about revenge, it's about reform." His lead attorney, Ms. Parker, nodded. "The evidence is overwhelming. We have multiple videos from different angles, witness statements, and now their past records showing a pattern of discrimination." Meanwhile, at the police department, Caldwell and Reed faced their internal review board. The room was tense as they tried to defend their actions. "We followed procedure," Caldwell insisted, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. The review board chairman, a veteran officer with 30 years of experience, shook his head. "You invented probable cause. You escalated a non-situation. You ignored clear identification. This wasn't procedure. This was prejudice." Across town, the mayor held a press conference announcing the formation of a special task force led by Judge Reynolds. "We're not just investigating this incident," she declared. "We're overhauling our entire approach to community policing." The task force's first meeting drew community leaders, legal experts, and police representatives. Reynolds opened with a powerful statement: "Every day, people experience what I experienced. The only difference is that most of them don't have the platform I have to demand change." Over the next weeks, the investigation revealed disturbing statistics. The department's own data showed that black drivers were 3 times more likely to be stopped and searched, despite being less likely to have contraband found in their vehicles. The district attorney's office announced criminal charges against both officers: false imprisonment, violation of civil rights, and official misconduct. The news sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. At the arraignment, the courtroom was packed. Caldwell and Reed, now in civilian clothes, looked small and defeated as the charges were read. Their attorney argued for leniency, citing their years of service. The presiding judge, a colleague of Reynolds, wasn't swayed. "Years of service during which you systematically violated citizens' rights. The badge gave you authority, not immunity." Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered with signs reading "Justice for All" and "End Racial Profiling." The movement had grown beyond just one incident. Reynolds used his position to push for broader changes. He worked with legislators to draft new laws requiring body cameras for all officers, establishing citizen review boards with real power, and mandating extensive bias training. The police union initially resisted, claiming the measures were too harsh. But public opinion had shifted decisively. Community meetings across the city drew hundreds of residents sharing their own stories of unfair treatment. 3 months after the incident, the City Council unanimously passed the Reynolds Reform Act. It included mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, a new early warning system to identify officers with patterns of biased behavior, community oversight committees with subpoena power, revised traffic stop procedures requiring documented probable cause. At the signing ceremony, Reynolds spoke to a packed chamber. "This law isn't about punishing police officers. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, religion, or background, receives equal treatment under the law." The legal consequences extended beyond the local level. The Department of Justice opened an investigation into the police department's practices. Federal oversight loomed as a real possibility. Caldwell and Reed eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges. They received 2 years probation, permanently lost their law enforcement certifications, and were ordered to complete 500 hours of community service in the neighborhoods they had patrolled. During their sentencing, Reynolds made a surprise appearance. "I hope you use this experience to understand the harm you've caused," he told them, "and I hope you'll work to repair that harm." The case became a model for other cities grappling with similar issues. Law schools added it to their curriculum as a study in civil rights law and police reform. As the months passed, the police department began to change. New recruits underwent rigorous screening for bias. Veterans attended workshops led by community members. The culture of silence that had protected bad actors slowly began to crack. The incident that began with a simple traffic stop had sparked a revolution in policing. It proved that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most meaningful changes, especially when those affected have the power and determination to demand justice not just for themselves, but for everyone. 2 years had passed since that fateful Sunday morning, and the changes were remarkable. Judge Reynolds stood at the entrance of the newly established Civil Rights Legal Clinic, watching as people from all walks of life entered seeking help. The building, once an abandoned warehouse, now buzzed with activity and hope. Inside, his daughter worked alongside other young lawyers, reviewing cases of racial profiling and police misconduct. She had graduated from law school with honors and chose to dedicate her career to civil rights law, inspired by her father's experience. "Dad, we have 3 new cases today," she called out as Reynolds entered. "All traffic stops that went wrong. But this time, the victims knew their rights because of your educational videos." Reynolds smiled with pride. After the incident, he had created a series of simple, easy-to-understand videos explaining citizens' rights during police encounters. The videos had millions of views and were now shown in schools, community centers, and even police academies. The police department had transformed dramatically. Chief Thompson, who had taken the incident as a wake-up call, implemented sweeping changes. Officers now underwent monthly bias training, and the department's diversity had increased by 40%. Community relations were at an all-time high. Officer Chen, formerly Angela Chen, the law student who had recorded the incident, now led the department's community outreach program. She organized regular meetings where citizens and police could discuss concerns openly. "Building trust takes time," she often said, "but it starts with listening." The Reynolds Reform Act had been adopted by 15 other cities, creating a ripple effect across the nation. Police departments that initially resisted were now embracing the changes, seeing improvements in both community relations and crime-solving rates. Every year on the anniversary of the incident, the city held a Justice and Unity Day. The event brought together law enforcement, community leaders, and citizens to celebrate progress and discuss ongoing challenges. Reynolds always gave the keynote speech, reminding everyone that the work was far from over. In police academies nationwide, the Reynolds case became a standard part of the curriculum. New recruits studied not just what went wrong, but how the aftermath led to positive change. Veteran officers shared their own stories of transformation, admitting past biases and committing to better practices. The former officers Caldwell and Reed had taken different paths. Reed, deeply affected by the experience, completed his community service and now worked with at-risk youth, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. Caldwell struggled more with the consequences, but eventually found work with a nonprofit focused on restorative justice. Reynolds' courtroom had become a beacon of fairness and reform. He used his position to ensure that justice was truly blind, regardless of a person's background. His rulings often referenced the importance of understanding implicit bias and the need for systemic change. The legal clinic had helped hundreds of people fight against discrimination. Many cases that would have been dismissed or ignored before now received proper attention. The clinic also provided free legal education to communities that needed it most. Technology played a crucial role in maintaining accountability. The body camera program had expanded, and a new citizen app allowed people to quickly report and document concerning police encounters. The transparency led to a significant decrease in complaints and use of force incidents. Universities across the country invited Reynolds to speak about institutional reform and the power of turning personal adversity into social change. His message was always the same: change doesn't happen because of one person or one incident. It happens when we all commit to doing better. The neighborhood where the incident occurred had also transformed. The community was more engaged, more united, and more vigilant about protecting everyone's rights. Monthly block meetings discussed not just safety, but equality and justice. As Reynolds prepared for another day in court, he reflected on the journey. The humiliation of that Sunday morning had evolved into a movement that touched countless lives. His daughter joined him, ready to argue her first case before his court. A full-circle moment that filled him with hope. "You know," she said as they walked into the courthouse, "that traffic stop changed everything." Reynolds nodded. It did. But remember, change only continues if we keep pushing for it. Every day, in every courtroom, in every interaction between police and citizens, that's where real change lives. The sun rose over the city, illuminating a community that had learned, grown, and committed itself to justice. The incident that began with prejudice had ended with progress, proving that even the darkest moments can light the way to a better future. As Reynolds took his seat on the bench, he knew that the true measure of success wasn't in the laws passed or the policies changed, but in the lives touched and the hope restored. The journey from that Sunday morning to this moment had been long, but it had been worth every step.